Hi everyone, we are going to go ahead and get started with this webinar. This is Alyssa Austin. I'm the Director of the Travel and Service Programs.
Welcome everybody. My name is Becky McCluskey and I'm the Assistant Director of Travel and Service Programs.
And tonight we're going to be talking about ISEP Australia Melbourne and Australia Sydney and Sweden and New Zealand. And that's a lot of programs that we're trying to cover tonight. We lump these programs together because they have a lot of similarities between them. And we believe our presentation is probably going to last somewhere around an hour. And then we're definitely going to leave some time for you to ask any questions that you have at the end. Just to orient you to your screen, you saw on that first page that we asked everybody to mute their microphones. That is really helpful for us, though we don't get a lot of feedback coming back at us. So just appreciate if you could leave those muted. And then over on the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a little chat box. And this is where at the end of the presentation, you'll be able to enter in any questions that you have. And we do ask, as we're covering a lot of information in this presentation, that you just hold your questions till the end so that we can get through everything. But we'll definitely leave time. So in terms of our agenda, what we're going to cover, the first half of the presentation is really about the major components that are part of all of these trips. So that's things like the leadership development program, cultural exchange, service learning. We're also going to give you an orientation to your online account and just go over some of the paperwork requirements that we have and talk a little bit about family preparation. The middle of the presentation is where we're going to get into some more specifics on each of the trips. And then at the end, we're going to wrap it up with what we call the Travel and Service Program nuts and bolts. And that's really some good program logistics like packing requirements, how healthcare works on the program, food restrictions, and things like that. So a lot of helpful information to come.
We've asked you for a lot of paperwork leading up to the summer, so we're just going to take a quick second to pull up an example account just to make sure that you're familiar with key pieces of it. So first, if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see the account balance. And tuition payments are due in full on April 1st unless you've set up a separate payment plan. If you'd like to make a payment online yourself, you can do that with the Make a Payment button. With the first two names listed at the top of your account, that's typically the primary and secondary contact. When you click on those names, you can see the email address that you have listed. Please make sure that those are email addresses that you check regularly because that's how we'll keep in touch with you leading up to the summer. If you scroll down, you'll get to the incomplete tasks section, and this lists all of the paperwork or items that we still need from you. So once those items disappear, it means we've received them here in the office, and that just gives you a good outline of the items that we need and what's coming up soon. One of those items is the camper wellness form, which is completed online by a parent. And that's really helpful for us because it's where you can list any allergies or any dietary restrictions your child might have, and that's really important for us to have in the summer. Another section that's helpful to know is the document center. That's where you can upload documents. And so if you go up to the top of the screen and click on additional options, you can find the document center right there. And so if you have any questions ever with your online account or just where to send your paperwork or how to figure out what you need to get into us, feel free to send us an email or just give us a call. We'd be happy to help you out with that. So in addition to your paperwork, there are a lot of other details we ask families to stay on top of leading up to the summer. So one of the most important ones right now is your passport. If you don't currently have a passport, please apply for one ASAP. And if you do have your passport, if you could just check quickly the expiration date on it because passports need to be valid 6 months beyond your return to the US. And so we've been checking that as people have been sending their passport copies in, but it's always helpful if you check that on your end as well. And then for sure, make sure that you bring your passport with you to camp. You're welcome to mail it in to us ahead of time, but you just want to make sure you definitely have it with you when you arrive. In addition to your passport, like I mentioned before, make sure you're checking your online account and getting your paperwork into us. You can turn items in early as well if you would really like to. One of the items that we ask for is just an updated physical every year. And so on your online account, that says it's due on May 1st. But if you're scheduled to see your physician after May 1st, that is completely fine. It's really helpful for us if you just reach out to us to let us know when you're going to be seeing your doctor, and then we can go in and update your online account so that it reflects the date when we can expect that paperwork from you. In addition to seeing your regular physician, we also encourage everybody to consider going to a doctor at a travel clinic as well, because doctors there can give you more recommendations about vaccinations and just more advice on staying healthy while you're traveling. Alyssa recently emailed out a health memo, and that's really helpful to bring with you when you visit a travel clinic as well, because the doctor will be asking you more specifics on where you'll be going on your program. And if you're interested too in just finding more information yourself about travel, health, and well-being, we encourage everybody to visit the Center for Disease Control website, or the CDC website. If you visit their website and then type in the country that you'll be visiting, they can give you a lot more information for travelers to that location. In addition to researching the CDC website, we also encourage everybody to just learn more about your destination. So learn more about the history of the location. You can go onto the Travel and Service Programs website, and there is at the top of the screen a Family Resources tab where you can find some more details that we've provided, or you can talk to people who went on the programs in past summers. As it gets closer to the summer, we're going to continue to be in touch with everybody, mainly via email. So soon we'll be emailing you information about your trip leaders. And then as it gets closer to the summer, we'll be in touch with your flight information, as well as program itineraries, and then reminders about your group's check-in. And then in June, during our staff training here, your trip leaders are actually going to be giving you a call just to say hello and to see if you have any last-minute questions before the summer starts.
Great. So all of our ISEP programs have three major components, including leadership development, service learning, and cultural exchange. And we're just going to go through those briefly right now, starting with leadership development. So I think, as you all know, these programs are really designed as first-year leadership programs with the idea in mind that it's helping participants really start the transition from being campers to being staff or leaders in general. It's really just to help them develop those skills that they can use out in the world. And we do have a curriculum that we base our programs off of, which is based on something called behavior interaction styles. You don't need to know too much about that now because you'll learn about it once you get to camp. But really, it's all about helping participants learn about their current strengths and then set goals to work on throughout the program. And part of our structure is that every participant will meet with their trip leaders 3 times formally throughout the program, starting in orientation. They'll have a midway check-in and then a final one before they go home. And that's really just to establish that mentoring partnership and also just give some feedback on setting goals and, really have them check in about where they're doing. All of this is going to be tracked in something that we call the CCR, and we do share those with participants and families at the end. It's really a document that's for you and not really an evaluation. And then we always get lots of questions from campers, just like, what does it look like on an ISEP program to take on leadership opportunities? And we do have a program we call Leader of the Day. So each day there will be 1 to 2 participants who are really in charge of the day, of course, with the assistance of our trip leaders. But they'll do things like help to wake the group up in the morning. They might organize a group meal, talk to a service partner to get the group prepped for the day. So there's a lot of different tasks throughout the program. You'll learn a lot more about that once you arrive to camp and meet your trip leaders.
So the groups do some tourist activities, but we really try to help you learn about the local culture in authentic ways. And so that can take a variety of forms on the programs. I think the strongest way is through time spent with a host family and or having the opportunity to shadow teens in school. It can also look like working with NGOs or other community-based programs through the YMCA. And all the programs that we're discussing tonight are really great because they all contain camps. And so they're actually very similar in a lot of ways to Becket-Chimney Corners. So they'll run big summer camp programs in the summertime, and then in the off season, they'll often host a lot of different youth groups and school groups.
So as far as community service is concerned, we do service on TSP not just to serve, but really to form connections with the places that our groups travel to. And we really encourage participants to enter into a service project, not necessarily with the mindset to help, even though that is important, but really to learn and to show compassion for the places that they're going to. And in terms of types of projects, you can really expect to have a mix of physical projects, which could be things like building a fence, painting a building, things like that, or social service projects, which is where you get to interact with people, ideally kids, is a thing that we look for in a lot of these programs. And once we get into the specifics of the trips, we'll talk to you a bit more about what types of projects you can expect in your program. At the end of our program, we do write up service letters, and we usually expect each program to have somewhere between 40 and 50 hours of service completed throughout the program. And so we'll write up a letter just documenting those hours of service and what the projects were, and then we send that out to families. As we know, a lot of participants do have school requirements for volunteer hours, and that letter usually will work for that requirement, but if you have additional paperwork, do feel free to pass that on to us.
So we purposely partner with YMCAs that have strong youth and teen programming. And so throughout your programs, you'll have the chance to meet and work with other teenagers through different activities and clubs through the YMCA, depending on which hemisphere you're in, either taking part in winter or summer camps, and then other opportunities like homestays, and for sure, lots of different types of service projects. And so on these trips, it's an incredible opportunity to have an exchange with peers from another part of the world. And so on the trip, we really encourage everybody to push yourself a little bit to meet other kids from outside of your ISEP group. Ask them questions, find out what it's like to be a teen in the country that they live in. And along those lines too, you don't have to, but it's really helpful to learn a little bit of the local language if they don't speak English where you're going. And even if they do speak English where you're going, often there's a lot of different lingo that we just don't use in the US. So that can even be a great way to meet new people, is just asking them about the words they're using.
So most of our programs do have some form of homestay on them. And for these programs, all of them have our more traditional definition of homestays, except for Australia Sydney. And the reason for that is that Australia has really strict guidelines around working with youth, and it's been very difficult for our partnership in Sydney to establish a good connection, which is usually with a school who's just willing to jump through the hoops to be able to get them organized. So instead, Australia Sydney will do school visits, but they don't do overnights. But outside of that, the way our structure typically works is the homestays will last anywhere between 5 and 12 nights. And the way it's set up is that participants will stay at night with the families, but then most days they'll actually meet back up with their group to continue on their itinerary. Typically, we'll have a couple days throughout the homestay where participants get to stay just with their family without meeting up with the group. And that's really just to help them connect and get to see what life is like with the family. We do encourage participants to bring a gift for their homestay family. And I think this is important even for Australia Sydney, because you're going to be doing a school visit and you might get linked up with a teenager. You will get linked up with a teenager. So bringing just a small gift is a really nice gesture. We always get tons of questions about what kinds of gifts to bring, and just a few examples. So we do recommend food items, things like a nice box of chocolates or maybe a favorite snack that you have. Although for ISEP New Zealand, they do not allow food from outside New Zealand to come into New Zealand. So other things that are non-edible is really good. So board games are good, calendar, or just any kind of like small gift-like item is really good. It doesn't have to be big. It's just a nice gesture. Finally, I just want to point out that I think homestays is one of the parts of our programs that a lot of participants feel very nervous about going into, which is completely normal because it can be strange staying with a family that you don't know. However, coming out of the experience, most of our participants also mark it as a big highlight because it's a time in the program where they really got to learn about the culture of the country that they're going to and just establish some positive relationships. So just something to keep in the back of your mind.
So it's our host partners who are in country who find and vet the host families for us. And so the way that works is they look for families who are either already connected to the YMCA or for families who are in the community or just known by them personally. And so a way of thinking about this would be if we had a group of campers from Australia who are coming here to the United States and they asked for a homestay experience, we would reach out to families like you to see if you would be interested in hosting them. And so often with our programs, families who are host families have hosted for multiple years. So they maybe have had ISEP campers stay with them in the past. And anytime a family decides to be a homestay family, our host partners always cover our guidelines with those families. And so a few of those guidelines include that participants are not allowed to have alcohol and they should not be smoking in the home, that parents need to be home when participants are there, and that our campers can only ride in cars with licensed drivers who are over 21 years old. On the flip side, once you're on your program, before you start your homestays, your trip leaders will really sit you down as a whole group and they'll just discuss what it's going to be like going into your homestay because they know it's a big new experience for everybody. And so first, they'll take some time to go over the rules that we expect you to follow while you're in your homestays. They'll also talk to you about your ID cards. So everyone at the start of your program will be given an ID card for the summer, and that has contact information for us here at camp, as well as the phone number for our host partners in country and a cell phone number for your trip leaders in country. And we just ask that you keep that ID card on you at all times throughout the program. Then your trip leaders will also just talk to you about some tips and tricks for making it a smooth transition into being with your host family. And then before your homestays actually begin, typically there's some kind of event or get together where your trip leaders will get a chance to meet your host parents before you go off into your homestays and start your separate experiences. And on that first night, the trip leaders give everyone a phone call just to check in with you and to make sure that things are going well. And one of the things that they'll do is to set up some type of code word, which is usually like a silly word like starfish, so that if you say the code word, it means, hey, something's not quite right. I want you to come over here and check things out. And that's just in case your host family also speaks English and you feel embarrassed saying around them, hey, this doesn't seem quite right. So again, I just want to reiterate what Alyssa was saying before, that with the homestays, it's an amazing opportunity and you just need to give it some time. And so there's a lot of different ways to break the ice with your family. We really recommend bringing photos from home. That can be a really excellent way of forming a connection quickly. And just be ready to help out in any way. So maybe you can help with making dinner, or you can introduce a new card game to them. There's lots of ways where you can break the ice, even if you don't necessarily speak the same language.
Great. So on TSP, you will travel with a small group that's similar to what you've experienced at camp in your cabin groups. And we really feel that this is one of the most valuable parts of our program, learning to work as a team and resolve conflict and really just starting to figure out what your unique contribution is to a group. It's just a really important part of the program. You'll find that right from orientation, your leaders are going to place a strong emphasis on developing a positive group dynamic, and really that they expect you to play a big role in making it a positive group experience. And Becky and I find that while the itineraries for these programs stay pretty similar year to year, a lot of the success depends on how much participants put into the experience and trying to help bring the group together. So just something to keep in mind.
We have a lot of responsibilities that we ask parents to take on as to help us prepare you and your child for their program. And so the first, as I've mentioned earlier in the presentation, is just making sure that you're staying on top of the paperwork that we need from you. It's also really important that parents take the time to read through the various trip materials that we have, especially the parent guide, which Alyssa recently emailed out along with that health memo. If your son or daughter has any medical or behavioral needs, please let us know about that, and then also how you manage it at home, because then we'll take that information and we'll pass it along to the trip leaders so that they can help your son or daughter have a more successful summer. All of our programs are amazing opportunities for young people to meet other young people, to get new perspective and to gain confidence. And so please give your child the space that they need to get fully immersed in their program this summer. And as we get closer to the summer and during the summer itself, we are setting up these programs for the participants and also getting the staff ready, but we're also here as supports for parents. So if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to us. We'd like to hear from you and we like to be able to talk things through. During the summer, while your child's on their program, it's okay for you to go on vacation, but it's important to know that we must be able to reach you by phone or by email.
And just as parents have responsibilities, so do participants on our program, as we've already talked about a little bit already. The first is just to actively engage in the program. Of course, we want you to bring your best selves to these programs and really try out a lot of new things. Second, looking out for each other as well. I think that's tied a lot to self-care. I think that when you're traveling in a foreign country and you're away from home, it's really important just to look out for your needs, make sure that you're hydrated, that you're wearing sunscreen, and that if you're not feeling well, that you're really communicating that back to your trip leaders, because they're there to support you throughout the program. They just need to know what's going on with you. Personal responsibility over your belongings and your behavior. So I think, as Becky pointed out already, I think if I remember this, that participants on the program do carry their own passports. And so they're responsible for those as well as any personal belongings that they bring. So that's anything from money to debit cards to a camera that you might bring. So if you're not comfortable keeping track of your belongings now, definitely start practicing at home, because that is a big part of our program. Expanding your comfort zone. These programs definitely expect participants to start to stretch that comfort zone. You're going to be faced with a lot of new activities and just new experiences on the program. We want you to feel good about trying those, so not pushing yourself beyond your limits, of course, but definitely trying new things to get all that you can out of the program. And then last but certainly not least, just remembering that you are representing Becket-Chimney Corners and the U.S. and just making sure that you're being a positive representative.
Great. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about each of the different programs, and we'll start by speaking about ISEP Australia Melbourne. So this is our newest program, but it's actually a revival of an older partnership we had since the 90s up to the early 2000s. And we partner with the Victoria YMCA in Southern Australia and the many different camps that are connected to this Y. And our main host is a man named Jai, who was actually a former Travel and Service Program Assistant Director. So the group is going to fly in and out of Melbourne, and you'll spend your first few days here. You'll take some time to ride the Circle Tram in the city just to see different parts of the city and to help get over your jet lag. And you'll also visit the Melbourne Museum, which focuses a bit on the natural and cultural history of the city. From there, you're going to head about an hour and a half to the southwest to Anglesea Recreation Camp, and you'll be at this camp for about 6 or 7 nights. And this camp is located just off of the Great Ocean Road, which is a beautiful stretch of highway right along the coast. And so you'll spend one of those days road tripping Along this highway, there's lots of different places where you can pull off the side of the road and walk along beautiful sandy beaches and just admire the incredible coastline that they have there. Throughout the program, you're also going to be completing various physical service projects at the different camps that you'll be visiting. And so one of your first projects will be at Anglesea Recreation Camp, actually with a local NGO through Zoos Victoria, where you'll be helping to remove debris and catalog debris out of local waterways. Some of your other projects will probably include small projects that you can do to just give back to the camps where you're staying. So it might involve helping out with some weeding in the camp vegetable garden or helping to remove some invasive species. There will also be a few different opportunities for social service on these programs. Like I mentioned earlier, so while you're staying at these different camps, there's often a lot of other groups also staying at these campsites. And so at one of the camps that you'll be visiting, called Lady Northcote, there's actually going to be 1 or 2 different high school groups that will be there for a music camp. And so we're planning on having you get involved with some of the activities that they're doing and get to take part in camp activities together with those high school students. From Lady Northcote Recreation Camp, you're going to head towards the coast to Phillip Island. And this is where a host partner is currently working on setting up homestays for the group. And so the homestays are probably going to last between 4 to 6 nights. And he's also trying to set up a chance for the group to shadow teens in a high school on the island as well. And while you're there, Phillip Island is known for its nature parks, so you'll also spend a couple of days touring those parks as well. At the end of the program, you're going to head to your third Y camp called Camp Manyung, which overlooks a huge bay. And again, you'll be at this camp for about a week. And while you're there, there will be groups of primary school students who are also there. And so again, it'll be a nice chance for hopefully your group to mix in with those primary school students and maybe put some of your camp experience to work helping out those little kids. Scattered throughout the itinerary, there are also a few different activity days scheduled in. So on your program, you actually get to go surfing twice. The first time near the beginning of the program at Anglesea Recreation Camp, and then again near the end of the trip while you're staying on Phillip Island. And then before you go home, the group will get to attend an AFL game or an Australian Football League game, and you'll also get the chance to visit a wildlife sanctuary.
All right, so now on to ISEP New Zealand. So for this program, the group is going to fly into Auckland, and then our main partner is on the North Island, and it's a camp, a YMCA camp. It's called Shakespeare Lodge. And this program takes entirely place on the North Island, but you will do a lot of road tripping, so you'll get to see a lot of sites that are scattered about on the North Island. So starting with Auckland, as I mentioned, this is the city that you will fly into, and this is the largest city in New Zealand, which contains a quarter of the population just lives here. And the city is really beautiful, especially because it's surrounded by grassy rolling hills that are dormant volcanoes. So you'll get to spend some time exploring those hillsides as they give you some really nice views of the city. But the majority of the program is not going to be in urban areas because that's really not what New Zealand is known for. It's really about getting out into some of those more rural areas. So this is a photo of one of the lodges at Shakespeare Lodge. So as I mentioned, this is one of our main hosts. This is our main host. This facility is pretty similar to our Becket-Chimney Corners YMCA Berkshire Outdoor Center. So it functions throughout the year. They have summer camps during their summer, and then they also host school groups and company retreats and things like that. And you can expect to have cabin-style housing here. They also have a small dining hall where you'll have most of your meals. And what's really nice about this as well is you get to take advantage of a lot of the activities that they have running here. It's right on the coast, and it's actually inside what's very comparable to a national park here in the U.S. So it's a really beautiful site with lots of opportunities for hiking and camp games and things like that. And they even have 2 giant pigs on the property that are responsible for taking care of all the food waste from the dining hall. Similar to ICEP Australia, ICEP New Zealand also has a lot of like environmental based service work, so a lot of physical projects. Conservation is extremely important to the country of New Zealand. Being such a small country, an island nation, they take their biodiversity very seriously. And a lot of the projects that you take part in are also going to be wonderful learning opportunities to learn about the environment in New Zealand. So some things that you might do could include tree planting, removing invasive species, trail maintenance, and things like that. So definitely bring an outfit or two that you're willing to get a little bit muddy. There are some social service projects on New Zealand, although it definitely is weighted more towards the physical service. You'll spend about a week at Shakespeare Lodge helping to facilitate a day camp. They're called their winter camp, and so you'll have a group of students that come out. They're all primary school students, and you'll get to take part in facilitating day camp activities. So it's a great idea to come prepped with some of your favorite camp games that you can potentially put on for other kids. About midway through the program, you will get to pack up some belongings and pile into a van with some of our New Zealand hosts, and you're going to head out on a road trip for about 1 week. And this is a really fun experience where the group gets to travel around the North Island. They'll spend 1 to 2 nights in each location. Some of the highlights include going to Rotorua, which is kind of like the Yellowstone of New Zealand. There's a lot of geothermals around there, and also the Coromandel Peninsula. So get to see a lot of beaches, coastline, and do some hiking. What's also nice is you'll be staying at campgrounds, which are very nice campgrounds in New Zealand, but you'll be staying in small cabins there because it's a little bit chilly to be camping out. And the group will get to do some cooking for themselves. So if you have any favorite recipes from home, definitely bring that with you. New Zealand's also very famous for all of their geothermals, and one of the highlights of the program is going to visit a hot water beach where you can actually dig into the sand and sit in hot pools, which is really nice. Otherwise, it's too cold for swimming. The group will also spend a night or two at a marae, which is a cultural center for the Maori people, which is the indigenous culture of New Zealand. It is more of a touristy experience, but also a really important experience. You'll get to go and watch some cultural dances and enjoy a cultural meal that's called a hangi. And I think you'll find that the New Zealand just has a really interesting model in terms of how they treat the indigenous people there. Maori people are really celebrated throughout the culture, and it's really woven into the entire culture of New Zealand, which is really interesting to see. And then as far as adventure activities, I think probably a lot of you are aware that New Zealand is very famous for pretty extreme adventure activities like bungee jumping and skydiving and things like that. Our groups are not going to be doing any of those extreme activities, but we do want to get you outside. So the group will be going kayaking. They'll do a lot of hiking. We may be doing some whitewater rafting and also some sandboarding. I definitely encourage participants to come ready to be outside no matter the weather. Definitely bring a good rain jacket with you because that's really what New Zealand is all about, is getting outdoors and seeing the beautiful sights.
Great. So next up, we're going to talk about ICEP Australia Sydney. We've been partnering with the Sydney YMCA since 2010. And on this program, the group is based out of a camp connected to the Sydney Y called Camp Yarramundi, which is in New South Wales. And it's about an hour train ride south of Sydney. And just to reiterate what Alyssa was just saying, for the 2 Australia programs and for the New Zealand program, it's going to be wintertime while you are on those trips. So please make sure that you're looking at the packing list and preparing for the cooler weather. I know with this program, for the past few years, we've had participants come back and say that it was just much colder there than they had previously expected. So the group is going to fly in and out of Sydney, and right after you land, you're going to get the chance to stretch your legs and take a walk down the beautiful Bondi Beach and admire the Sydney skyline. Later on in the program, you'll get the chance to return to Sydney for some sightseeing and some touring. You'll get to see the Sydney Opera House, and you'll definitely take some time to eat some Tim Tams and some meat pies while you're there. And you'll also have a 2-day urban leadership program experience in Sydney as well. So like I said, Camp Yarramundi becomes the group's main home base on the program. And the camp is pretty similar to Becket-Chimney Corners, but it's a little bit smaller and it's next to a really beautiful river. And so while you're there, the group's going to be staying at cabins on site. Unlike camp here, you might get the chance while you're there to work together to prepare meals in the dining hall. As you can see in this picture, because it's their winter, it tends to be much quieter at that camp. So they may or may not be hosting other groups while your group is staying there. Shortly after you arrive at Yarramundi, the group will prepare for your 5-day journey-based program. And what this means is you're going to take 5 days you'll still be on the camp property, but you're going to leave the camp proper and head out into the bush. So you'll spend your time hiking and canoeing and potentially rock climbing, and you get to camp out in tents. And you'll be with the Yarramundi staff who are there really to help support you in all these activities and to provide you the gear and the expertise as you take part in them. And I think that'll be a really great way to just kick off the program and help bond the group and also help develop your leadership skills. After the journey-based program, you're going to head back to Camp Yarramundi and you'll have a couple of days to get ready for holiday camp. Like I said, it'll be winter time, so a lot of the kids in Australia are going to be on winter break. So they host a week-long holiday camp at Yarramundi, where you'll get the chance to shadow the Yarramundi staff, and you'll really act like assistant counselors for the kids that are there for the week. And so past groups have had the chance to lead different campfire activities and songs, of course, and other activities like color war activities and low and high ropes courses, and other just team building initiatives and games. On your program, you'll also take a few day trips outside of Camp Yarramundi, and so one of them will be out to Manly Beach, where you'll spend the day learning how to surf. So you'll get fitted with dry suits, and you start out with a tutorial on land, like you see in this picture, and then you'll head out into the water. And you always start on land because it is very, very difficult to surf. And so hopefully by the end of the day, you'll be able to stand up on your boards in the water. But it's a challenge, but it's also a ton of fun. Another one of your day trips will be out to the iconic Blue Mountains while you're there, and you'll spend the day hiking, and you might get the chance to see the Katoomba Falls and the Three Sisters. You'll definitely see a lot of really epic views of the rock formations and the valley below. You also get the chance to spend the day at a place called Walkabout Wildlife Park, where you'll learn a little bit about Aboriginal culture, and then you'll also get to see some really adorable Australian wildlife up close, like Pepper, the koala. And then near the end of the program, your group will get to spend a couple of days shadowing students at Winmalee High School. And this is really an awesome opportunity to meet with Australian teens and to learn what school is like on the other side of the world. We had a camper who came back a couple years ago, and he told us that going into the shadowing experience, he was nervous because he's like, I don't really like school here in the US, but he said that he loved having this opportunity and loved going to school in Australia. So I hope you all have the same experience.
No homework over there for you guys. All right, so moving on to the final program tonight is ISEP Sweden. So this is one of our oldest partnerships dating back to the 60s. We're partnered with a small YMCA camp called Camp Breivik, and it's a unique program that we have as the group gets fully integrated into a 3-week session of camp with Swedish teenagers. So the group will start their program by flying into Stockholm, and they'll spend about 1 week here doing some city tours and seeing some of the beautiful sights around the area. They'll also get to visit some NGOs, and including going to a large YMCA there called Frihuset to do some service projects. And then at the tail end of their time in Stockholm, you are going to head out onto your homestay experiences, and this will last between 3 and 4 nights. And the families really are spread out all over Sweden. So you could be a few hours outside of Stockholm. And the reason for that is the families that our participants will stay with are Camp Breivik families. And that's been a really positive experience because you'll get the chance to meet some Breivik campers before actually going to Camp Breivik. It's made our ISEP participants a whole lot comfortable just sort of making that transition. And then at the tail end of your homestay, you'll travel up to Camp Breivik. This is a view from one of the cliffs that looks over Breivik. And it's a very small camp. It's much smaller than Becket-Chimney Corners, but it's very similar in a lot of the camp ways and the activities that they do. And one of the wonderful features about it is that it's right on the Swedish archipelago. And so there's a canoe trip that happens and you get to leave right from Camp Breivik. But you're going to be fully integrated into a cabin group with Swedish teenagers, which is a really wonderful cultural experience. And a lot of our participants make very lasting relationships that they carry with them for years to come. So this is just a photo of inside their dining hall, just to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like there. There's a ton of fun camp activities, similar to Becket-Chimney Corners in some ways that they do, and a lot of service project opportunities for our participants to take on. One thing that they do there is they get to plan a full day of like, it's called America Day, so whatever that means to you, get to plan some fun like American activities to share with the teenagers there. And then about midway through your time at Camp Breivik, you're going to head out on what they call a hike, and this is a canoe trip. So you'll leave right from Breivik and go out for about 8 or 9 nights, and you will stay on islands out in the Swedish archipelago, which is a really amazing experience for all of our participants. You'll get mixed in with some kids from your ISEP program and then some kids from Camp Breivik. One of the fun things you'll get to experience is what they call white nights. And so because of where Sweden is located, it's their summertime and the sun never fully sets in that location that time of year. So I'd say it probably gets the darkest around 2 o'clock. And this is what it looks like before it starts to get bright again. So sometimes groups will go out and paddle at night instead of during the daytime, which is just a fun thing to do. And then coming back to camp, you will go into a nearby town called Norrköping. There are some a YMCA there and some other small nonprofits where Camp Breivik partners with, and you'll get to do some service projects, most likely physical-based service projects. And then during that final week at Breivik, your Breivik friends, Swedish friends, will go home, and you're actually going to stay on and welcome in a group of younger Swedish campers. And this is a camp for kids that have dyslexia but are trying to learn English. And so your role is really just to integrate in with them, plan some games, and get them to have fun speaking English with you.
Great, so now we're going to head into our final portion of the presentation where we'll be focusing on logistics that pertain to all 4 of these programs. And so we're going to start by speaking about luggage, and the type of luggage that you bring really just comes down to personal preference. But as you can see in this picture, most people bring some sort of rolling suitcase. Sometimes people bring backpacks, but again, just comes down to personal preference. It's important that you're able to carry or roll all of your belongings yourself and that you keep your bag to under 50 pounds. And we highly recommend that you leave room in your bag for souvenirs that you get while you're on the program. In addition to your checked bag, we also encourage everybody to bring a small bag or a backpack as a carry-on item because that works really well on your program for any kind of day trips you might be taking. And then when it comes to packing, just make sure you follow the packing list that we sent out closely. You want to make sure you're bringing clothes that you can layer and that you're comfortable re-wearing. Because laundry on these programs typically gets done 2 to 3 times. And so the way that works is the trip leaders will buy laundry detergent for the group, and then they provide the motivation to get the laundry taken care of. So usually while you're at the Y camps, there will be laundry facilities or in your homestays where you can wash your clothes. But for all of these programs, even on the Sweden one, you're in the Northern Hemisphere, so it'll still be summer, but it's similar to camp where at night it can get quite chilly. And again, on all these trips too, you want to be ready for potentially cold or wet weather. In addition to your checked bag and your carry-on bag, we also recommend bringing a spare small bag with you to camp. And the idea with that bag is we have storage here at camp where you can leave that small bag while you're on your program. You can leave a pair of clean clothes behind so that when you come back to camp from your program, you have clean clothes to change into. And it's also a nice place to just store any unnecessary items that you decide you don't want to bring overseas with you. Last but not least, if you're a musician and you play an instrument that can easily be taken on an airplane, even if it's a guitar, camp is happy to pay to check the guitar for you so that your group can enjoy some of your musical talent on the program. And if you have other types of easily transportable games like card games or things that you enjoy, bring those along too, because it's nice to have for some downtime to enjoy with your group.
As all these programs take place in camp-like settings, most of your meals are going to be eating in like dining hall settings and where there's usually a variety of options occasionally. And the food is kind of similar, I think, to what you find in terms of American options with some nuances, which are always fun to try. We can accommodate a wide variety of food allergies and dietary restrictions. We just need to know ahead of time so that we can work with our hosts to make sure that they can accommodate those. So the best place to put that information is in the online forum, which is the BCC YMCA health forum. So if you can just enter that in, and if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to us. So in terms of sometimes we get questions about traveling overseas in terms of water sanitation and things like that. For these programs, that's really not a concern for participants. We haven't had any issues with that, and participants will always have access to clean water when they're over there. And then we really just encourage you to keep an open mind and try new things. As I mentioned, a lot of the food you're going to find is probably similar to options that we have in the U.S. However, there are always some differences. And especially if you're staying with your homestays, we always encourage you just to try it. And if you don't like it, that's okay. But just give it a try, as it's a cultural experience to try foods in another country.
The group is together for most of the program, but there are times when participants are not directly supervised by their trip leaders. And so examples of that would be homestays or when they're on the school visits, as we've discussed earlier. And also if trip leaders decide to give the group some free time. And so that's typically in designated locations like a market or just a downtown area that people are interested in exploring. And so before free time is started, the trip leaders always go over very specific guidelines, which I'll talk about right now. So the first, all the participants are required to always be in groups of 4 or more all together. So the idea behind that is if one camper were to get hurt, the second camper could stay with the first person and the other 2 campers could go get a trip leader or go get help. Also, when it comes to free time, the trip leaders will definitely set specific boundaries that they ask you to stay within. So if you're in a downtown setting, they might say stay within 2 or 3 blocks. Or if you're in an airport, they might say stay within this wing of the airport. Then they also give a specific check-in time or a meeting time and then have a designated meeting location. And as I mentioned earlier, all the participants will have ID cards that they are also expected to keep on them. And like I said before, those ID cards have contact information for us here at camp, but also for the trip leaders while they're in country and for our host partners in country.
So as of now, all of our trip leaders are officially hired. We're just waiting to get some bio information from them before making the announcement. But you can expect that in the next couple of weeks. We'll send you an email with some more information about who they are. So that's exciting. But just in general, I want to give you a little information about who our trip leaders are. So our leaders are all 21 years old and older, and they are all certified in wilderness first aid and CPR. And then if there's going to be any swimming on the program, we'll also have leaders that are lifeguard certified. About between 90 and 95% of our trip leaders come from within our organization. So we have a lot of staff that come up through the camps. Perhaps they were camp counselors or they were program staff. Sometimes we get staff that come over from day camp or from the Berkshire Outdoor Center. But really, why that's important to us is because it results in our staff really having an understanding of and feeling connected to our community. These are not just trips, they're really an extension of camp, and we want it to have that feel in the program. So that's a big thing for us. We also, in terms of our interview process, we look for leaders that have experience working with teens, that show good judgment-making skills, and have experience with leading groups of people off-site, as it's very different from the on-camp experience. I'd say that for Becky and I, definitely one of the best parts of our job is working with our staff. They're really talented, fun group of people who are really wonderful mentors for young people.
So participants are not allowed to bring cell phones or devices that can connect to Wi-Fi. And that's because on these programs, we really want them focused on the group and the new teens from the country that they're visiting and getting to meet, and really all the variety of experiences that they're having, and not worrying about social media during all of that. So even though they won't have their cell phones with them, there are a couple ways that participants can still keep in touch. And that's mainly through using computers. And so computer access does vary a bit from program to program, but in general, the camps where the groups will be staying have a computer or two that participants can occasionally get on to either send emails home, which we think really is actually the best way for participants to keep in touch with their parents, just because they have such busy schedules. And for some of these programs, for all these programs, the time difference can make it hard to connect. So email is a great way to just keep in touch quickly. The second option is with Skype. We encourage everybody to set up a Skype account, and you can do that online. And then once you have your Skype account, if you put money onto your Skype account, campers can log in on their program and then through the computer call phones or cell phones here in the US if there's money on your account. And so again, that's been another helpful, easy way for participants to keep in touch with family members back at home. For parents, it's important to know that our trip leaders aren't monitoring who is calling or emailing home and how often. And so it's helpful for you to have that conversation with your child before the program starts as to how often you'd like to hear from them. But I just want to encourage you to just be mindful of the fact that the groups are going to be really busy on these programs, and that sometimes their computer access will be pretty limited. And so in general, if participants do reach out to their parents, they often only do so once or twice. On the other side of that, for participants on your program, if you've tried to connect with your parents and you haven't been able to and you'd like to, let your trip leaders know. They can work with our host partners in country to make sure you have access to a computer so that you can connect with them. So during the summer, while your child's on their program, even if you don't hear from them as often as you'd like, you will still be hearing where they are in their itinerary, because roughly every 10 days or so, the trip leaders will send us an email, and then we'll email that out to all the families. And that email will just be a general group update on what they've been up to and where they are in their itinerary. Then during the summer, if you ever need to reach your child, the fastest way to do so is to call us here at camp. At the group's check-in, we're going to provide you with a cell phone number for 2 of our on-call cell phones that we carry with us 24/7 throughout the summer. And those 2 phones get rotated between myself, Alyssa, and Olivia, our program assistant. And so again, you just call the on-call cell phone number, and then we'll help you connect with your son or daughter as quickly as we're able.
So as much planning as we put into these programs, we also understand that unplanned events can happen. And so we want to talk to you a little bit just about how we go about preparing for potential more major emergencies on program. First, just in terms of our resources, we do look to the U.S. State Department as a major resource, as well as the Center for Disease Control and our peer organizations. The State Department issues travel warnings and advisories, and we do closely monitor those throughout the year, and especially during the summertime while our groups are out on their trips. And then the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, we've included links to that organization in all of your parent guides, is one of the best resources for health recommendations. And we encourage all of you to go to both the State Department travel pages and the Center for Disease Control just to do your own research. But one thing to note is that just because there may be an advisory issued for a country does not necessarily mean that it's going to affect our group. So when we see an advisory come up, we're really comparing that to the itinerary and the activities that the group is going to be doing to decide whether or not something is safe for our groups to partake in. Our program partners are also a very unique resource and probably one of the best resources that we have on these programs. They're the ones that plan our programs and are also our on-the-ground hosts. So they really have local knowledge that we do not, and we definitely would rely heavily on them in the event of an emergency. We do enroll all of our participants in something called the STEP program, the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program, and that's a program through the State Department, and basically we are giving our participants information, including passport information and our itineraries, so that the State Department knows where our group is in the country when they come in and when they leave, and also emergency contact information. So if something were to happen, the U.S. government would be aware of where our groups are. We also do purchase evacuation insurance for all of our participants on the programs, and we will send out that information probably in May, so you can look over the policy that we have. But really the important thing to know on that is that if there were something that happened in a country and we needed to evacuate a group, the expense would not fall on families. That's something that Becket-Chimney Corners would take care of. And then when to cancel, when to evacuate, I put that up here because typically when issues come up on program, it typically is not a black and white decision. You know, if there was an earthquake in a country and it affected the city that our group was staying in a pretty serious way, that's a pretty clear decision that, you know, it's not safe, we should bring the group home. More often than not, the things that come up on programs fall into that gray zone where it takes a little extra research and evaluation to decide whether or not a group needs to change locations or even come home. And in the event that something major comes up on the program, we are always going to be involving families in that decision and just communicating our process throughout it. So we really try to partner families on that, and we'll definitely weigh your feelings and thoughts into any decision that we make.
We want our programs to be positive, growth-filled experiences for all of our campers. And so along that line, we like to be really clear with everyone about our behavior expectations. And within TSP, we have something called our 5 non-negotiable rules. And the non-negotiables are extremely important because if one of these rules is broken on a program, it means an immediate send home from the trip. And it also means that you must wait 1 year before you are allowed to return to camp. And so we review these 5 non-negotiables again while all the campers are here during their orientation, but we also like to cover it while parents are present during this webinar. And so the 5 non-negotiable rules, you'll immediately be sent home if on the program you are ever drinking alcohol, if you ever smoke any substance in any form. So this includes e-cigarettes or vaping. If you participate in any other illegal activity, so for an example, 1 year a camper was caught shoplifting, and that's not acceptable at all. The 4th one is any type of sexual activity on the program. And the final one is breaking our supervision rules. And by this, we mean basically if anyone intentionally sneaks out or sneaks away from the group. It's really important, especially at night, that once the trip leaders have you in your housing, that you stay put for the night and that the trip leaders really always know where you are while you're on this program. We have sent campers home for reasons other than these 5 non-negotiable rules. And we want to be fair, but we also understand that on these 36-day programs, even a small behavioral problem can really start to bring down the entire group and or hurt our relationship with our host partners and exhaust our trip leaders. And so if there is some type of behavioral issue, typically we follow a 3-step process where first the trip leaders will pull the participant to the side and just clearly let them know what they saw that was inappropriate and what they expect to see changed. If that behavior were to continue from there, then we loop parents into the conversation and let you know what's going on and get your input and involvement as well. And then if the behavior were to still continue, that's when we would begin the process of sending a camper home.
Great. Just a side note, I do see that there's a few questions coming up in the chat box. Just want to let you all know that we are almost done with the presentation. We have a few more slides to get through, and then we'll start to address questions. So if you could just hold on for a few more minutes, that would be great. So around healthcare, so we place a strong emphasis on risk management for all of our programs. However, accidents, illnesses, and injuries can and do happen on our programs occasionally. Our trip leaders, they're certified in wilderness first aid and CPR, and they do carry first aid kits on the program, but they're not medical professionals, and that's where the structure of our programs really differ from the on-camp experience, where they have a whole medical staff that is prepared to take care of campers. And because of that, we tend to be much more conservative when it comes to managing healthcare on the program. So even if we have a participant that just has a stomach ache that's lasting a little bit too long, we're much more likely to just bring them to a clinic to get checked out and make sure that everything's okay. Whereas at home, you might just put them to bed and let them get some rest. And a lot of that has to do with the busy nature of our program, that kids can just easily get run down more easily. So anytime that we do bring a participant to higher level medical care, we will always be in touch with parents to let you know what's going on. And we try to do that when participants are at the clinic. So if you do have any questions for a doctor, you would be able to touch base at that time. And we also will help you be in touch with your child, just in case you want to hear their voice and just check in with them to make sure that they're okay. Any expenses that come up on the program around medical care, our trip leaders will cover that and send you a bill at the end of the program, so participants don't have to worry about that. As I mentioned, we do purchase evacuation insurance for our groups. We also do cover international health insurance for our participants. So you will get a copy of that policy in May when we purchase that. So you can hang tight for that. And then last but not least, just a reminder that participants on these programs are responsible for carrying their own medications and administering their own medications. So that's different from the on-camp experience. So if you're not comfortable remembering to take your medication every day at this point, parents, we encourage you to start now getting participants into that habit so they'll feel very comfortable once they get onto the program.
So your program tuition covers all expenses like food and snacks, transportation, and activities on the programs. But most people like to bring a little bit of personal spending money just for souvenirs or gifts or their own snacks. And if you do decide to bring spending money, we recommend bringing no more than $300 on the program. And we suggest that you consider bringing it in 2 different forms. So we usually say about $60 in crisp new bills. And the reason I say crisp new bills is because when you go to exchange the currency into the foreign currency, they often only take money that is crisp and new and not wrinkled or ripped in any way. So $60 in cash and then about $240 on a debit card. In the past, some participants have tried bringing gift cards that have said that they work overseas, but we've never had those gift cards work overseas. So I would avoid the gift cards. And for participants, if you are bringing a debit card, make sure that you know the PIN number before you get to camp for the card. And also make sure that you tell the bank you'll be using the card overseas and the dates for while you will be overseas. As Alyssa mentioned earlier, participants are responsible for carrying your own money as well as your passport and that ID card that camp will give you. The trip leaders will be carrying camp-issued credit cards, and they can give funds to campers if for some reason your debit card is not working. But before we do that, we always reach out to parents first to get permission. And it's important to know, too, that often the ATMs overseas and our credit card company charge a small fee, anywhere from like $5 to $10 on top of the cash that's withdrawn. So if you do agree to giving your son or daughter some extra spending money, then the trip leaders at the end of the summer will put a bill together and we'll mail that out to families.
Great. So we have booked our flights for all of these programs. I'm just going to go through a list so you know what airlines your group is flying on. So both Australia programs are flying with Qantas. Sweden is flying with Norwegian Air, and New Zealand is flying on United and Air New Zealand. So if any of you are interested in signing up for frequent flyer miles, you're welcome to do that. You just have to go to the airline website and look up which program to sign up for. Once you have your number, you can email that to either Becky or myself, and we'll pass it on to our travel agent to get logged in. So that's for flights. You can expect us to send out flight itineraries closer to May. And then as far as other transportation on the program is concerned, we work with a local bus company to transport our participants from camp to the airport and back to camp once they return. And then in country, transportation is taken care of by our program hosts, and it usually looks like private buses, like mini buses or vans. I know on the Sweden program, you might do some local transportation such as trains while you're in Stockholm, but otherwise it's just buses and things like that.
Groups always spend a couple of days together at camp before and after your program for your orientation and your debrief. And so please make sure you're checking your parent guide on the cover. It has your specific check-in date and time. And so all of the check-ins and the check-outs for travel and service programs, it's different from being in camp. We have specific times, and those check-ins and check-outs are always at the Chimney Corners sign barn, which is across the street from the administration building. During the check-in, we will give a brief presentation covering actually a lot of the topics we talked about this evening. And then there's a chance for families to ask any questions, and then it's time for you to say your goodbyes, and the participants go off with their trip leaders. And you'll spend the next couple of days here at camp doing a lot of different types of team building games and get to know you games. You might come up with a group contract. You'll start talking about the leadership curriculum on the program and just what it's going to be like on your ISEP trip. And then at the end of the program, once you come back to camp, you'll again have about 2 days of a debrief here at camp where you'll wrap up your leadership paperwork, and you'll also put together a photo slideshow for your families that you then present at your group checkout.
All right, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us
Yay.
and getting through all those slides. We did it. We're now going to move on to answering your questions. And so I know some of you have already started already. So find that chat box over on the right-hand side of your screen. And we're just going to start at the top and we will go through it. So let's see. I think the first one had to do with flights, specifically about the ISEP Sweden flight and connecting flights. We don't have that information in front of us right now, but we will send out details of the flight later in May. So you can expect to get that. Just offhand, I think the Sweden flight is somewhere around 6 hours. But yeah, that's just a note. So you mentioned that the Australia Sydney participants will visit Walkabout Wildlife to learn about Indigenous culture. Will they actually interact with any Indigenous people either there or elsewhere?
Yeah, so especially on the Sydney program, while they're at that Walkabout Wildlife Center, a lot of the programming talks about just like skills that the Aboriginal peoples used, but I don't know if they have anyone who's on staff there who works with the group. And a way of thinking about it, it's sort of similar to here in the US with Native Americans, where it's just the Y there doesn't have a strong relationship necessarily with Aboriginal people, and so it's there's not a ton of interface time, I would say, with Aboriginals there.
I know they're working on establishing those relationships, though. We just don't know if it will be ready for the summer. Question about whether or not this is recorded, and the answer is yes, and we will send out the link tomorrow so that anyone that missed it can view it, or if you want to watch the whole thing again, you're welcome to. A question about updates. I heard you say to expect 3 updates every 10 days. Do you also post pictures on SmugMug more often?
So we actually don't use SmugMug. That's just for the in-camp programming, but we have started. Last summer was the first summer where we started including pictures with those group updates. And that's just because sometimes it just comes down to the technology that our trip leaders have, if they're able to take photos and then able to upload them up to us. But when we do get photos from the trip leaders, now we are having a great time including those with the group updates.
Can we bring a music player and earbuds? And then we also have a following question about whether or not you can bring a GoPro camera. So the answer is yes on both of those. We also get a lot of questions about Kindles. Kindles are fine. Really, the whole point is we don't want you going on the internet, checking Facebook and things like that. So we don't want anything that can access the internet, even though I know Kindles sometimes can, but it's a really bad connection, so we're okay with that.
I will say with GoPros too, just be extremely careful if you are bringing it, because remember, you're responsible for all the items that you bring. And we've had a participant lose their GoPro in the airport on their way to their destination. So please keep track of that closely if you do bring one.
Is the Sydney flight a direct flight or does it have a layover? Definitely has a layover. It's either somewhere in Texas or on the West Coast. I just don't have it in front of me right now. Will we have a chance to talk to program leaders before the trip?
Yes. So during their staff training, I'd say it's the 3rd week in June, they'll be giving all the families a phone call to say hello. And we tell them to always talk to all the participants and at least one of the parents. So during June, if you don't hear from the trip leaders, or if you get a voicemail from them saying that they've tried to reach you, don't panic. Just reach out to us and we can help try to set up a time for you two to connect.
Great. Can you remind us of the origination airport in the U.S. for the trips? I also don't have the information in front of me right now, but the airports that we fly out of are either Boston, JFK, or Newark, or Hartford, but I know these programs don't go out of Hartford, so it'll be one of those 3. How do you screen the host families? Do all family members get checked the same that we do, Raptor? Yeah, so that is a great question. So Becky gave a little bit of an overview. One of the complications with this is that other countries don't manage background checks the same way that the U.S. does. They have their own standards depending on where you are going. So it really does depend on the country. All of our programs do have their own screening process in place. And as Becky mentioned, the families that are chosen are families that are known to the YMCA and that they do go through like a home state orientation where they do learn all of our guidelines. And I think if you want like a checklist of exactly like how the families are screened in terms of like their like legal requirements for background checks, definitely feel free to reach out to me and I can get that for you. Would serious athletes have the opportunity to stay in shape while on their trips other than physical service?
So I'd say it kind of depends on the program and your itinerary, but in general, especially at a lot of these camps, I'm sure there are rolling hills and various places where you can just run in circles on the camp property. I know sometimes groups have just had a lot of group members who are really gung-ho, and so sometimes the whole group will wake up early and go on morning runs, or certain members of the group will wake up early and go on morning runs together. And I'm sure you can work with your trip leaders to make sure that you can build in some time to get some physical activity in.
Great. Does the Norwegian Air flight come with in-flight food? So yes, and that goes for all of the international flights. And then can parents send emails to participants?
Yes. So definitely make sure you get your son or daughter's email address and vice versa, that they have yours so that they can send you emails on the program. The only limiting factor is that just the group doesn't always have access to computers, but they should at various times throughout the program. So it won't be every day, but we'll work with our trip leaders and our host partners to try to help them get to a computer roughly, I'd say, every week or so.
Great. All right, so I think we've come to the end of the questions. So we are going to wrap this up and let you all go. Thank you very much for attending. This is our contact information. I think you should already have it though, but definitely do not hesitate to reach out to us if you do have any questions between now and the summer. And we can't wait to see you all in just a few months.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Have a nice evening.